Okay, so good evening. It's a pleasure to see everybody here. Thank you so much for your time today. And we're going to have some great conversation by some wonderful students. And before I do that, let me tell you a little bit about our organization. My name is Sophia Chu. I'm the Executive Director of the Caribbean Community Service Center that's headquartered here in the city of Detroit. We support, empower, and advocate for Caribbean nationals in the Americas. Our vision is to grab the entire Americas, which would be the Caribbean, North America, and Canada. So right now, a lot of the work that we do is through collaborations, partnerships, and to make sure that we're meeting our people where they are. So it's an honor tonight to have the guests that are going to speak to us. I'm going to have them introduce themselves to you, but I'm going to tell you about the organization or the school that they're with. They are Wayne State University law students, and they're a part of the Community Advocacy Clinic. The Community Advocacy Clinic is a part of the clinical program at Wayne State Law School. The mission of the clinic is to collaborate with community groups, coalitions, and public interest legal organizations to develop, pursue non-litigation strategies to address pressing legal needs. They came to us a couple months ago. Their Professor Sabrina, help me, Sarah, Balgamwale, too many syllables,
correct.
But to find out how they could assist us where we are as it regards the conversation around Black immigrants. Typically, there's a conversation around immigrants, and Black immigrants are not a part of it. So after conversating with her, we talked about how our community members are treated from a criminal conviction, and when they're going through the process to get citizenship, the pathway to citizenship, sometimes they're not given the best advice, especially when it comes to expunging their cases or just legal advice themselves. And we're not trusting enough of a lot of people to give us the information. So what we task them to do is to help us find a way to get the information to our community members that can assist and help guide us in the right way, one, to get the information, and two, resources that we can use to get our community members where they need to be along this pathway to citizenship. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah, Paige, and James to introduce themselves and to kick the program off.
I don't know if James is having sound.
Yeah, I was muted by the host, sorry. Right,
so I'm sorry. That's one of the things. One of the rules around here is I get to mute and unmute people because we don't want overlapping of conversations. And also when it comes to the question and answering, if you could put your questions in the chat box, we can get them answered the proper way. So sorry about that, James. I got trigger happy.
Oh, it's all right. So good evening and welcome to Before, During, and After Criminal Convictions. My name is James and I'll be one of the presenters today, along with Sarah and Paige. Like Sophia said, this semester we worked within the Community Advocacy Clinic at Wayne State Law School. And we had the pleasure to work with Sophia to put together this presentation and provide some information to you all tonight.
Before we get started on the actual content, I just wanted to take some time to review what our goals of this presentation are. So first, we really are working together to provide general legal knowledge that can help you make the best decisions and give you the information you need. So you know the questions to ask and also guide you to resources that will allow you to make the best decisions for yourselves. We also want to provide you guiding materials that you can reference for helpful reminders and resources. As Sophia mentioned, she's recording this presentation. I believe it'll be living on the website. And in addition, me and the team here at Wayne State are finalizing some written materials and guiding materials. So you also have something in hand that you can reference as you need. And lastly, we want to be able to provide the community with a better understanding on how criminal convictions affect their immigration status. And an important note is that the following presentation, it's not legal advice, but it is general information that you can find helpful. And if you have specific questions about your specific legal situation, we definitely recommend seeking the guidance of an immigration attorney. But we're hoping that the information that we provide today will help you figure out what are the right questions to ask and help you get started on the right path to finding the solutions that fit your circumstance.
All right, so what we'll be covering today is first an understanding of your rights when you're interacting with law enforcement. Second, we'll be learning about the effects of criminal convictions on your immigration status. We'll also be reviewing what expungement is in Michigan and what it means for your immigration status. And lastly, we'll have time for questions and answers. So you can drop your anonymous questions in the chat at any time, and we will cover those at the end of the presentation.
All right, thank you. So I'm going to begin by sharing some information about rights before a criminal conviction occurs, and how knowing these rights can protect them and yourself, and keep you safe throughout these encounters. So going to the next slide. So the Constitution of the United States applies equally to all persons, regardless of immigration status. So you have, and some of these rights extend into encounters with law enforcement, and the information that I plan on sharing in this portion of the presentation is primarily focused on that. A lot of it based around the Fourth Amendment, making unreasonable search and seizure unlawful, and how profiling and things like that factor into it in terms of in different situations. The next slide. Why it's important to know these rights. Interactions with law enforcement can have immediate consequences like detention, and in turn, those consequences can affect your immigration status in the long run. And likewise, information that you volunteer to law enforcement throughout these interactions can be used against you later, depending on what exactly it is. And then signing documents without going to an attorney first and seeking that kind of advice may lead to the waiver of some of these rights that you would otherwise have. And just overall, how verbalizing your rights can keep you safe and protect your rights over the long term. So going to the next slide. So generally speaking, the Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendment are the basis of some of these rights that you have. The Fourth Amendment is a pre-arrest, it provides you with some pre-arrest rights, mainly that unreasonable search and seizure, and how profiling, and I'll get into how profiling factors into that in some slides to come. The Fifth Amendment provides individuals with post-arrest rights to preserve fairness, and that's where your right to refuse to answer questions comes into play. And then the Sixth Amendment, for the purposes of the information I'm providing you today, includes the right to contact an attorney to have them review different things about your circumstance, so that you don't have to, so you don't waive your rights that you without even realizing it. So going to the next slide. So the Fourth Amendment in traffic stops. So the basis of the Fourth Amendment is that law enforcement needs probable cause for their searches and seizures to be lawful. Without oversimplifying it, probable cause is a reasonable basis for suspicion of a crime or evidence of a crime that makes stops and seizures lawful. On the other hand, racial profiling does not fit into probable cause, and racial profiling, as many of you are probably already aware, is the use of a person's race as a basis for observing, investigating, interrogating, searching, or arresting an individual for a specific offense. So if profiling is the basis of the stop, then probable cause is not cannot be met, and that's when the Fourth Amendment comes in. So going to the next slide. So continuing off of that, Michigan has international borders with Canada. And so with the new 100-mile rules, US Customs and Border Patrol officers have the authority to conduct searches anywhere within a 100-mile radius or zone of an international border. Because of the Great Lakes and how Michigan is situated in between all of them, the entire state is considered to fall within a 100-mile zone. And so your encounters anywhere in the state could be with local law enforcement, immigration officers, or US Customs and Border Patrol. And within that, there's the opportunity for law enforcement to contact the Customs and Border Patrol officers who can look into immigration status, and in certain instances, detention can ensue after that. And so that's why knowing your rights is really important, so knowing who you're dealing with also while anywhere in the state. So go into the next slide. So what your rights might look like in practice. On the left, I have a few blocks with some different situations of how your rights might come into play. Like, you do not have to consent to search of yourself or your home. You may remain silent and you may say so out loud. If arrested by the police, you do have the right to an attorney. You do not have to answer questions about your origin, your citizenship, or how you entered into the country. And if you are arrested by police, you also have the right to make a phone call. And some do's and don'ts on the right side. So one of the main things, aside from the rights, is that these can be extremely stressful circumstances and situations. So it's 100% normal to be anxious. So one of the things you're going to want to do is you want to stay calm and focus on your safety, and then focus on your rights. And in doing so, you want to ask who is stopping you if it's not already clear. Having your immigration documentation relevant to you on yourself, and making sure that it's not expired. You don't want to lie or give any false information. You don't want to physically resist or run away. And you don't want to sign anything without speaking to an attorney prior. And then go on to the next slide. So situationally, here's how some of those rights also might come into play. So going back to the point of safety, staying safe while if you are pulled over while driving, going back to safety, you want to turn off your car, turn on the internal lights, open your windows part ways, and place your hands on the steering wheel. And if you're a passenger in a car that's pulled over, you want to place your hands on the dashboard. You may have to show your driver's license and all the documentation that comes with operating a motor vehicle, but you don't have to provide information regarding your immigration status. You don't have to consent to a search of your vehicle, and you want to verbalize that as well. And here I have a few examples, or I have an example of I do not consent to a search of my vehicle. You can consent to a search if you do, each you and your passengers can be searched personally. Passengers, on the other hand, do not have to provide their name or documentation upon being pulled over. Some things that also might come to mind that you want to ask, again, if it's not already clear, what agency you're dealing with when pulled over and why you're being stopped. Because if there's no reason for you being stopped, then that goes into that Fourth Amendment unreasonable search and seizure and stoppage in traffic. So going to the next situation on foot. So again, you want to stay calm and you don't want to flee. Verbalizing your rights here can also be important. So you state your refusal to be searched, and you may refuse to provide information about your immigration status or answer any other questions. But then it's also a good idea that you want to verbalize these so that there's no miscommunication and So to hopefully prevent any kind of situation from escalating into something else. Questions you may want to ask here. You want to maybe ask if you're being arrested and if you're free to leave. And then promptly you can do so. And so next, in your home, next slide, yep. So now in your home is where people have the highest expectations of privacy. So knowing your rights here can hopefully help you maintain that privacy if you're approached by law enforcement while in your home. So one of the biggest things that you do not have to let law enforcement into your home without a warrant signed by a judge. And so one of the questions that you may want to ask is, do you, and with walls separating you from law enforcement, you may want to ask if they have a warrant, and if they do, if they can show you the warrant. And by doing so, you don't have to necessarily open the door to see that warrant, but you may ask for it to be slid under the door or shown in a window so that you can stay inside of your home throughout the interaction. Opening up your door isn't something that you have to do, and actually opening up your door may lead to law enforcement finding reasonable suspicion to then, or probable cause to then enter your home. So going to the next slide. So if you think that you've been a victim of profiling and unreasonably stopped and searched, the ACLU of Michigan is a great resource for you to contact. Here I have their email and their phone number for you to get in contact with them. I'm going to pass it on to Paige.
All right, my name is Paige Henry, and I'm going to be talking to you guys about the effects of criminal convictions on your immigration status. So immigrants may be ineligible to enter or remain in the United States due to criminal convictions. So an immigrant may be either inadmissible or they may be deportable. To be inadmissible means that you can't be granted entry or re-entry into the United States. It can also mean that you can't change to certain new forms of immigration status, such as lawful permanent residence or temporary protected status. To be deportable or removable means that you're subject to removal in immigration court. So there are several grounds to inadmissibility and deportability. Those crimes include crimes involving moral turpitude, controlled substance offenses, multiple criminal convictions, drug trafficking, human trafficking, and money laundering. So I'm sure people are wondering what a crime involving moral turpitude is. So there's no agreed upon definition of what entails moral turpitude, but federal courts have generally agreed that it includes crimes that are inherently fraudulent or involve an intent to defraud. A single conviction of a crime involving moral turpitude can make a citizen deportable. If one, the offense carries a maximum possible sentence of 1 year or more, and the person committed the offense within 5 years after the date of admission. There are also some additional criminal grounds for deportation, and those grounds include domestic violence offenses, violation of protection orders, and aggravated felonies. So what is an aggravated felony? An aggravated felony is a term of art that includes crimes designated by Congress. They can also include crimes that are not felonies. So these aggravated felonies include, but they aren't limited to, murder, obstruction of justice with at least 1 year, with at least a 1 year sentence, rape, fraud or tax evasion, sexual abuse of a minor, prostitution business offenses, certain drug offenses, crimes of violence with an at least 1 year sentence, certain firearm offenses, theft or burglary with at least 1 year sentence, and commercial bribery, counterfeiting, or forgery with at least 1 year sentence. So how can an immigration lawyer assist? So an immigration lawyer can help you by disputing that a conviction actually makes you removable. They can help determine whether you qualify for a waiver of inadmissibility. They can determine whether you qualify for other immigration relief, seek review of a decision by a federal court. They can also help you if you're facing criminal charges. So you should tell your criminal defense attorney that you need help of a immigration attorney. If you're ever in legal trouble, you should also pursue an immigration consultation as soon as you can if you find yourself in legal trouble. So how can criminal convictions impact naturalization? So naturalization is the process by which U.S. citizenship is granted to a lawful permanent resident. One of the requirements for naturalization is showing good moral character during the statutory period immediately preceding an application for naturalization. So that would typically be within the prior 5 years. But there can be some bars to good moral character that might be surprising to some of you, and they can include conduct that's not actually a criminal offense, and that could be things like adultery, failure to support dependents, or being a quote habitual drunkard. So a conditional bar just bars the finding of good moral character when it's committed during the statutory period of up to 5 years. A permanent bar bars certain crimes, and it permanently bars the finding of moral character that's required for citizenship. So some of the conditional bars to good moral character are acts related to prostitution or other commercial vices, crimes involving moral turpitude, violations of any law or regulation related to controlled substance, 2 or more offenses for which the aggregated sentence of confinement is 5 years or more, engaging in, assisting in, or conspiring to commit drug trafficking offense, deriving income principally from illegal gambling activities, convictions for 2 or more gambling offenses, and also confinement for an aggregated period of 180 days or more in a corrections facility. The permanent bars are convictions for an aggravated felony, participation in genocide, or commission of acts of torture or extrajudicial killings. Criminal convictions can also impact asylum. So asylum allows an immigrant to remain in the US who seeks protection because they've suffered persecution or fear that they will suffer persecution due to their race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion. So a conviction of a particularly serious crime can make an immigrant ineligible for asylum. This category of crimes includes aggravated felonies, like we talked about before, and a violent or dangerous crime will presumptively bar asylum. So how could criminal convictions impact DACA status? So you cannot renew DACA status if you've been convicted of a felony offense, a significant misdemeanor offense, or 3 or more misdemeanor offenses not occurring on the same date and not arising out of the same act, omission, or scheme of misconduct. But you can also be prevented from renewing your DACA status if you're otherwise deemed to pose a threat to national security or public safety. All right, so there are differences between significant misdemeanor, non-significant misdemeanor, and felony. So a felony is a federal, state, or local criminal offense punishable by imprisonment for a term exceeding 1 year. A significant misdemeanor is a misdemeanor as defined by federal law, specifically one for which the maximum term of imprisonment is authorized for 1 year or less, but greater than 5 years. And regardless of the sentence imposed, is the offense of domestic violence, sexual abuse or exploitation, burglary, unlawful possession or use of a firearm, drug distribution or trafficking, or driving under the influence, or where an individual was sentenced to more than 90 days in custody. This doesn't include a suspended sentence where 90 days or less was actually served. Okay, so a non-significant misdemeanor is a crime with a term of imprisonment that is 1 year or less, but greater than 5 years, if it's not an offense of domestic violence, sexual abuse or exploitation, burglary, unlawful possession or use of a firearm, drug distribution or trafficking, or driving under the influence, and where the individual is sentenced to time in custody of less than 90 days. So what qualifies as a national security or a public safety threat? So there are certain factors that may be used to determine whether or not you're considered a national security or public safety threat. And those include, but they're not limited to, gang membership, participation in criminal activities, or participation in activities that threaten the United States. There are some exceptions that may be made in exceptional circumstances. So traffic offenses typically aren't considered misdemeanors for the purposes of DACA. However, driving under the influence is considered a significant misdemeanor, and it's regardless of what the sentence is. So what should you do if you need to renew your DACA status, but you have criminal history? So if you revealed your prior conviction record in your original DACA application and it was approved, then your renewal is going to be low risk if there are no new incidents, arrests, convictions, or accusations of gang activity. However, if you've been charged with a new criminal offense, then it's important that you tell your criminal defense lawyer that you have DACA and that you need expert advice. An immigration lawyer then can examine your record and advise you of your risks. Temporary protected status is also another form of immigration relief. And so this nationals from certain countries may be eligible for this status due to conditions in their country of origin that temporarily prevent them from returning safely, or in certain circumstances where the country is unable to handle the return of its nationals. So this may be granted to eligible nationals of certain countries or parts of countries who are already in the United States, or eligible individuals without nationality, but without the nationality of those designated countries, but who last resided in those countries. So how can criminal convictions impact your eligibility for TPS? Well, you may not be eligible to receive or maintain TPS if you are convicted of a felony or 2 or more misdemeanors committed in the United States, or if you're otherwise deemed to be admissible for those inadmissibility grounds that we talked about earlier, or if you're subject to any of the mandatory bars to asylum. So it's very important that you seek legal help. You should consult with an attorney if you have criminal convictions before you seek to renew your DACA status or apply for TPS, asylum, naturalization, or any other form of immigration relief. You can search some resources in your area at www.immigrationlawhelp.org. And some of the organizations that are in our area are International Institute of Metropolitan Detroit, Michigan United, Justice for Our Neighbors, Catholic Charities of Southeast Michigan, Michigan Immigrant Rights Center. They have locations at Ypsilanti as well as Grand Rapids. So next we're going to switch it off and talk about expungement.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Khan, and I'm going to be talking about expungement and what it means for your immigration status. Paige, if you can get the next slide, please. So first, an overview of what expungement is. So under Michigan law, certain convictions can be expunged or set aside from the public record. I think it's important to make the distinction in Michigan, even though the laws talk about expungement and we refer to it as expungement, set aside is a more accurate term. Expungement in Michigan means that your criminal record won't be destroyed, it just won't be viewable from the public. So it's important to know that if you do have a conviction expunged, who is able to see it. And the list of folks who are able to see it include the courts that had the authority to review your conviction and the court in which you were convicted, an agency of the judicial branch of the state government, Department of Corrections, law enforcement agencies, federal agencies, and U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services can also see it. The folks who cannot see it are potential employers, potential landlords, and anyone else outside of this list of folks would not be able to see a record that's been expunged. Next slide, please. So in Michigan, the legislation is referred to Michigan's Clean Slate legislation. It was passed in 2020, and Michigan did have a version of expungement available, but the 2020 bills really expanded who was eligible, what criminal convictions were eligible for expungement, and it also introduced an automatic expungement bill that will go into effect in December of 2022. So let's go over some of the benefits of expungement. There are many social benefits to having your record expunged. The first being that employers won't be able to see your criminal convictions, so that could help for employment opportunities. Additionally, it can help with housing, with renting opportunities, and also having a criminal record expunged can also additionally help with things like child custody. So it's important to acknowledge the social benefits of expungement. Next slide, please. So what convictions are eligible for expungement? Under Michigan's Clean Slate legislation, you can have up to 3 felony convictions and an unlimited number of misdemeanors expunged from your public criminal record. It's important to note that no more than 2 of them can be assaultive convictions. There's also a time limit, a minimum time limit that needs to have been met. So for misdemeanors, at least 3 years have to have passed in order to get a misdemeanor expunged. For felonies, at least 7 years have to have passed. Michigan's Clean Slate legislation, the most recent version, also includes traffic convictions, which is huge because traffic convictions make up a large part of the convictions in Michigan. However, the exception to that is that any traffic offense or moving violation that causes injury or death cannot be expunged. Also, Michigan's Clean Slate legislation allows for multiple convictions that arrive out of the same event to be treated as one conviction. So what this means is that if you are If you get arrested and convicted, and if they give you multiple charges that would count as multiple felonies, all coming out of a single event, they'll treat it as one, so you won't hit your maximum limits as quickly. Also, Michigan's clean slate legislation has created a whole separate process to expunge misdemeanor marijuana convictions. And so we're actually going to take a little bit of a detour and talk about marijuana and immigration status. So in April of 2019, USCIS amended its practice manual to emphasize that even legal conduct involving marijuana is a basis for severe immigration penalties. This is important to note because even though in Michigan there are legalized uses of marijuana, it can still have pretty serious adverse consequences if you're not a US citizen. So a non-citizen who admits to an immigration official that they possess marijuana can be found inadmissible, can be denied entry into the United States, have their application for, have their green card application denied, or even their naturalization application denied. And depending on the circumstance, it can make a lawful permanent resident deportable and even impact eligibility for family immigration. Again, this is true even if the conduct was permitted under state law, the person was never convicted of a crime, and the conduct took place in their own home. And this is because marijuana is still considered a federally controlled substance, and immigration laws have certain rules and adverse consequences for the use and distribution of federally controlled substances. Next slide. So some helpful tips to consider. So if you are not a US citizen, it's advised to stay away from marijuana. If you truly need medical marijuana and you can't find a good substitute, you should get a legal consult so you can fully understand what potential immigration consequences can be a result of getting a medical marijuana card. You shouldn't carry marijuana on you. You shouldn't carry a medical marijuana card and marijuana paraphernalia in your car or in your home or on your person. And you also want to remove any text or photos related to marijuana use from your social media and phone. So essentially, we don't want to have documentation of marijuana use. If you have used marijuana, specifically if you have any documentation or convictions using marijuana or have worked in the industry, you should get a legal consult before leaving the United States or applying for naturalization or a change in immigration status. And never discuss conduct involving marijuana with either an immigration, border, consular, or law enforcement authorities unless your immigration attorney has advised that it is safe to do so. So back to expungement, there are risks to expungement, just as there are benefits. If you're a US citizen, there are little risks with expunging your record, but it is still important to be aware that if you have outstanding matters with the court, the expungement process could trigger those outstanding matters. Because the expungement process requires you to be in contact with law enforcement, get fingerprinting, and be in contact with the court, it just increases likelihood of triggering outstanding matters. If you are a legal permanent resident, it's advisable that you seek an immigration attorney to decide whether expungement is right for you. It's important to note that if you are planning to naturalize and become a US citizen, your immigration attorney will need your complete criminal records as part of that process, and expunging your records can make that process more difficult. Currently, there are steps. You should be able to access your own record by going to the court in which you were convicted in. But expungement is rather new to Michigan, and so there have been known kinks to it. So regardless, if you're seeking naturalization and you're a legal permanent resident, it is advisable that you get a certified copy of your criminal record before it's expunged, and also to talk to your immigration attorney so that you can make the right decisions. And then if you're undocumented, it is extremely risky to seek expungement. Because the expungement process, again, increases contact with law enforcement and it increases chances of being in contact with ICE. So again, if you're, making the decision to pursue expungement really is all about balancing the risks and benefits. And you can best do that by seeking specific legal advice from an immigration attorney. Okay, so if you have made the decision to expunge after weighing the risks and benefits, there is the expungement process is actually pretty lengthy. So we're just going to go over a few of the key points. So first, you want to get a copy of your criminal record. To check in Michigan, if you have a criminal record, you can do so via the Internet Criminal History Access Tool. I believe there's a small fee associated with that, but you can also apply for a waiver on the iChat website. And then once you have determined where all of your convictions are, you want to contact the local court where you were convicted to get a copy of your criminal record. Then you want to look at Michigan law under MCL 780-621 through 621D to confirm that you're eligible. Ineligible offenses to note include any sex offenses, offenses punishable by life in prison, second offense, domestic violence or human trafficking offenses, drunk driving or moving violations causing injury or death. And then you want to file form MC-227. And on the last page of that form are pretty detailed instructions, and you want to closely follow those instructions. Expungement process was made to be able to be done without the help of an attorney. However, it's complicated, so you want to take extra care. And if you're having trouble understanding the instructions, then it would be advisable to seek out an attorney, because if you are denied for your expungement application, even if it's a frivolous mistake, you would have to wait 3 years to reapply for expungement. However, there are lots of resources available. If you are seeking expungement, we talked about some of the laws and the forms, but also the Attorney General's website has been pretty useful for providing expungement checklists and also providing up-to-date information on expungement. And this is especially important when automatic expungement goes into effect. And I believe that they're still working out the kinks for marijuana misdemeanor expungements. So you want to be sure to check that out if expungement is something that you are considering. Additionally, if you are a Detroit resident, the city of Detroit has a Project Clean Slate, which is specific to Detroit residents, which pairs Detroit residents with attorneys to help them through the expungement process. And lastly, here's a list of some legal services that may be of use. Lakeshore Legal Aid, Legal Services of Eastern and Western Michigan, Project Clean Slate are all resources that are doing work around expungement. The State Bar of Michigan Legal Resources and Referral Centers can help you find an attorney that may fit your needs. And then Michigan Immigrants' Rights Center, as Paige mentioned before, is one of the forefront organizations in Michigan doing immigrant rights work. So they're always a great place to start off your search and can definitely provide you with additional resources. That concludes our presentation. We want to thank you for listening. We want to thank Sophia and CCSC for partnering with us. We're now handling questions. So our chat right now, currently only us three and Sophia can see them, so all questions will remain anonymous. So if you want to put your questions in the chat, we can answer them. And then we want to remind people that we are unable to answer questions about your specific legal situation. And again, if you have those specific legal questions, you can seek out one of the resources that we've mentioned before, or seek out the advice of an attorney.
Okay, thank you. You opened up my eyes to a few things. It's so interesting that a lot of times we have this conversation about marijuana, and especially since it's legal here in Michigan, even for recreational use. A lot of the immigrants, whether they are green card holders or DACA or TPS, we kind of think that since it's the law here, we can go ahead and, use and be very blatant with using it, posting it, social media and those kinds of things. What we fail to remember is that it's still a federal crime. So us as immigrants, we probably need to pay better attention to what we're exposing to the world when it comes to the opportunities for, going along that pathway to citizenship. So that really opened my eyes. So now even when folks have those questions for me, I can better, gauge how I answer it. Similarly to with the expungement, right? You see they do these pop-up tents, telling folks to come and get their records expunged. But again, immigrants were we're traveling a different kind of a path or journey. So we think we can join the line to, not realizing that we're now exposing ourselves to situations that we shouldn't even have been in the first place. And the third thing I think which drives it home for me is the conversation around the difference between like a defense attorney and an immigration attorney. So we have a case, we go to court, but we're also a green card holder. So that now puts us in, we're getting this defense attorney taking care of our case, but we're still exposed in this pathway to citizenship, and we don't even know that. So thank you guys for shedding light on a lot of the questions that I didn't even know that I had. And I'm gonna see if anybody else has any questions or even comments that they want to share in the chat right now. So I appreciate you guys putting this together. It really, really, really was eye-opening to me. I'm not used to folks being so quiet.
So I have a question, and the question is, does expungement work on border crossing to Canada? So if you had a misdemeanor expunge, will Canada Border Service see the record? Or when you return to US, will Customs and Border Patrol be able to see? So that's a great question. So I believe if you go into Canada, Canada Border Services may not be able to see, but US immigration and citizenship will be able to see, but I guess it would be determinate. I think what's important to know is that there shouldn't be any, unless, actually, let me actually get a clarification on that, and I'll answer that question. But if there are any other questions in the meantime, while I get an answer to that, feel free to ask.
So there is a question. So if we're being straightforward, expungement has no benefits for immigration, such as citizenships, etc. So it's best to avoid conviction of deportable offenses.
Yeah, so I would say that again, it really depends on your specific situation. There may be some individuals who find that the benefits to expungement, the social benefits, whether it's employment or housing, may outweigh the risks. But I will say that the most benefits that come with expungement are to US citizens, because they come with the least risk, the most amount of benefit. And then obviously, depending on your immigration status, there may be different risks. And so that's why we really do advise folks to seek an immigration attorney if you are thinking about expungement. And then to answer a previous question, so Customs and Border Patrol can see your criminal record, even if the misdemeanor has been expunged. Something else that I wanted to mention, so even though I had those broad categories of some of the benefits and risks of expungement, if you do have DACA status, it has been shown that expunging your record can be beneficial, and that immigration courts do look more favorably to criminal convictions that have been expunged compared to criminal expunsions that haven't. But again, even in that situation, you should still seek advice from an immigration attorney.
Did you guys have any closing comments?
Just that I think that probably one of the most important takeaways is that you really do seek that advice of an attorney. I think a lot of this information, I think I can speak for all of us, that it's not necessarily like the most hopeful information to be presenting. But it doesn't mean that just because you have a criminal conviction that your situation is necessarily hopeless. And there are resources and there's legal aid that's available if you can afford an attorney. So I think it's important that you do seek the advice of an attorney, even if you're not feeling that there is any hope for your situation.
Also, to piggyback off of that in terms of getting legal advice. So, if you get a court-appointed attorney, a public defender, public defenders do have to meet, there is a legal standard that they have to meet when it comes to advisement of like deportability of crimes. But we do advise seeking advice from an immigration attorney who's an expert in the field and can provide you much more specific and narrow advice.
I was waiting to see if there were any more comments or questions in the chat. It's a lot of information to absorb. So I know there's going to be folks that probably reach out to me afterwards, So it's great having this relationship with you guys. So if there's situations or questions that we can come up on, we can also ask for your advice, your school's advice as to how to proceed. And we do have access to the attorneys, some of the attorneys that you mentioned that we have our organization has worked with from an immigration standpoint, that we can also provide referrals for them to those attorneys. Okay. So I think it's safe to say we'll save the additional questions for a later date because there is nothing else coming in on my side. I don't know, Sarah, if there's anything on your side.
Nope.
All right. Thank you guys again for attending. Thanks for your great presentation. We can probably do a debrief closer to the end of the week just to see where we stand and how we can continue to support our communities. I want to applaud everybody that took the time out today to listen in, to get the information to our other community members that were not able to chime in. I will have this recording ready to share on social media once I clean it up just a tad bit. And then it will also be on our website, caribbeancommunitysc.org. You guys have a great evening and be safe, and happy Thanksgiving and happy holidays when it gets here. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.